There are few things that we talk about more in real love books, groups, than, let's see, love, truth, and trust. If I had to pick the top three subjects, I think that'd probably be it. And so I get asked a lot, because people ask, what's the secret? Trust. Well, but what does trust look like? Oh boy, there are just so many ways to describe it, and some mean something to one person and some to another. So I'm going to tell you a story just that I heard a few days ago that illustrates what trusting looks like. Real trusting, not just definitions. Talked to a man who has embraced real love with enormous enthusiasm. Been doing it for quite a while, at least a year, I'd say. Could be longer, shorter, I don't remember. And he has a long history of using women for sex, excitement, power, but, primarily sex. He's presently in a relationship with a woman and was like moments away from persisting in the old pattern, using her for sex. And literally moments away, thought to himself, this has never worked before. I'm just going to trust that doing what I've been told works better is going to work better. And he did. So he said, no, I'm not going to do that, even though his partner, frankly, was only too eager to comply. So he made the conscious decision that he didn't want to keep repeating that pattern. That is trusting. When instead of doing what you've always done, instead of doing what you'd maybe even like to do, you trust the truth, trust in the love of other people, and make a different choice. Saying you trust doesn't mean very much. People say that to me fairly often. I trust you, but I'm afraid to ask you a question. I got that 2 days ago. No, if you're afraid to ask me a question, then no, you really don't trust me. I'm not telling you you should, not criticizing you, but in real trusting, there's no fear. So he trusted in the power of the real thing, in the truth, in the lessons of past experiences, and in true principles. He chose instead of just reacting, which is what most people do. He realized that in recent years, in addition, he didn't stop there. He must have been on some kind of crazy roll. He thought about some business decisions that he had made in recent years that were not, well, he just didn't feel like he was being entirely honest, not like breaking the law or outright cheating somebody, but he didn't feel good about it. So he started taking the steps to restore to people what they deserved, correcting what he believed to be his unloving mistakes. That's trusting. Trusting is followed by a change in feelings and a change in behavior. It's not just something we do in our head. It changes us. Here's somebody who writes, I'm happy for you to use this in a video chat if you want. Well, here we are. And I tend to do that. Everybody might benefit, might not, from knowing some things about what I talk about here on video chats. So first, these are all real experiences, either experiences I had in person, on the phone, by Skype, by email, whatever. Real people, real conversations. I don't need to make this stuff up. In fact, some of it is beyond what I would have imagined possible. Now, second, sometimes I change the details so that people won't recognize you. So every once in a while, somebody will write and say, here's my story, but don't use it in the video chat. Well, pretty much what I do is going to make it so you're the only one that recognizes it anyway. If you say, for example, that you fly helicopters in Africa, well, as far as I know, that could really only be one person in real love, and those of you who know him would know immediately who that is. So if that experience would be embarrassing in any way, then I would change the details. I could easily preserve the overall context, in this case doing a mechanical, somewhat mechanically oriented job in a remote place. But instead of saying helicopters in Africa, I'd say you were working on an oil rig in the Gulf of Mexico. Close enough. Or if you have two children and you live in Maine, then I'd give you 3 kids, just a bonus, one you don't have to take care of. And I'd put you in Oregon. So, you know, I'm going to change the details. Every once in a while, somebody is offended because they recognize themselves in the story. And then, even though I've changed the details, they're the only person that recognizes themselves. And then they go around and I love these stories. And they tell everybody how mad they are that I used them in the story. Well, now everybody knows that it's them. So you do it to yourself if you spread it around that I told stories about you. And most of the time it wasn't about you anyway. If it's not a potentially embarrassing situation, then I might not change the story, especially if I have your permission, like this one right here. And to make a particularly educational point, I might combine the stories of 2 people. Never let the details get in the way of a good story. Sometimes also I answer the writer of the story, let's say it's by email. I answer by email in a certain way to the writer, but then I might change the answer on the video chat and sometimes the details in order to illustrate a slightly different principle, because the story was great, but I wanted to, you know, teach a little bit different principle than I taught when I, you know, responded in person. People have actually called me and wondered why I essentially lied to them in my personal answer as compared to the video chat answer. Well, easy. My personal answer is to you. On the video chat, I'm teaching something, and the answer is not to you. So I changed the details in order to teach a principle to a greater audience. So anyway, just a little background on video chats. Now, back to the writer who said I could use this on a video chat. This thought process cropped up the other night. I was thinking about my own worthlessness, but then I said to myself, no, I don't want to keep choosing these thoughts. I want to get rid of them once and for all. It's poisoning me. This is beautiful. As I've said many times, we can't stop random destructive thoughts from happening, but we can choose whether to nourish them or replace them. So good for you. Just in saying stop, that changes the subject so that you can then replace them with what's true. You continue. I've been reading a lot of real love content, seeing and hearing others say that we don't intentionally choose to do what we do. For example, a parent with no knowledge of real love doesn't intentionally wake up and say, instead of giving my kids love and teaching them what they need to thrive in life, I'm going to get angry and suck any potential of that out of the relationships we have. So what about when you do know about real love? You're asking me. You have zero control of what comes into your mind and thoughts. That's impossible to control, or is it? So once we know, are we still doing it unintentionally? So first, somebody without a knowledge of real love or any experience with it, they really don't have much of a choice about being loving. Sure, it exists. The choice exists theoretically, but not practically, because they can't see it. Loving isn't even in their menu of choices. Like doing something on your computer. If there's no choice to do something, how could you possibly know to do it? I mean, theoretically, for example, I could build a scaffold and I could paint a version of the Sistine Chapel on the ceiling of my living room. But that's theoretical. Practically, no, I really can't, because I have no experience at all with painting. None. I wouldn't know where to start. I wouldn't know how to mix the paints. Same with people who have no experience with real love. Being unconditionally loving isn't a real choice. Now, what if somebody does have a knowledge of real love? Well, they do have in the beginning, have a head knowledge, an intellectual understanding of loving choices, but they might not yet have the ability to make loving choices. I could show you a video on how to execute a perfect golf swing, but that doesn't mean that the next day you're going to go out and be great at golf. So what do? It's all about practice and practice again, and learn from your practicing and learn from your mistakes and practice. But relative to your question, we don't mean to have unloving thoughts come into our minds. But now, instead of saying, I didn't mean to, one of the more common excuses for the dumb things we do, we can begin to mean not to. We can choose not to entertain distracting thoughts, which would include unloving thoughts, lustful thoughts, angry, critical, whatever. You continue. I had a clarity of thought the other day that there's always a choice. I know I've used this excuse before, that I don't choose what comes into my head, and therefore I had no control over it. I know I've heard you talk about it before, that sure, we don't get to control that bit, but as we learn a different way, we get to choose what we do with them. So in short, I do intentionally continue to have these thoughts, mine being around worthlessness, because I'm choosing not to throw them out instantly, or stamp them down, or get reminded of the love that I do have. Reminded of the love, I have when I forget. I don't intentionally throw them out. So because I don't intentionally throw them out, I am choosing unloving thoughts. And that's really true. If you don't choose to see to it, for example, that all of the debris, we had a recent inspection for termites. If you don't choose to see to it that the foundations of your building are clear from wood debris, that there are no places for termites to nest, then essentially you're choosing to have termites. And when they do the termite inspection, boy, they just jump all over your head if you're not making choices to prevent something. Because if you don't, you're allowing it to happen. You continue. So really, once we know more about what we do and how to change it, if we choose not to do anything, we are intentionally doing this to ourselves. Yes. Love must be invited consciously into our lives. It requires a conscious choice. If we simply fail to choose loving, then everything else requires no choice. Fear, anger, reflexive, controlling, all just happen to us. They intrude, they take over. They're like a fire or a vicious virus. Simple inaction is essentially an invitation to everything awful invading our lives. So we have to be more aware, more conscious. In my backyard, I have oodles of ditches and water drains and so on. And if I don't consciously choose to keep those cleared out, then if a big enough rain comes along, I'm going to get a flooded basement. Well, I didn't choose to have a flooded basement, but, well, actually I did, simply by neglecting what it takes to prevent one. And we do a lot of this in our lives. You continue. I've seen that in other ways previously. That we just get a choice with how to deal with the thought. But this way has more impact, as the word unintentionally has been an escape route for me to hide behind which I never saw before. It's a victim statement. It's I couldn't help it. It's reinforcing the helplessness, which is a lie in myself and in everybody else. Is this right? Yeah, it really is. And hooray for you. I've seen this over and over again. The people whose lives change simply make a choice every day to believe what is true. To believe, for example, that I love them, or somebody else that they know loves them, or several people do, that God loves them, that they're not alone, that everything will be okay. By making that choice, it changes everything. And if we don't make that choice, all of the negative thoughts will just come pouring in. I knew a lady who was just emotionally crippled. And yesterday, she wrote and said, I went to work today for the first time ever and enjoyed myself. I was myself. It's a miracle. And she chose to remember that all day long. She went to see the boss, and in the past that would have just incapacitated her. And she said, all I had to do was, before I went in to see the boss, was go, my daddy loves me, God loves me, everything's going to be fine. And she goes in, and the boss just made some minor suggestions and told her she was doing a great job. She would have worried about that for the whole hour between the time she got the request and the time that she went in there to see the boss. Our conscious choices change everything. And if we don't make them, events, people, and just randomness will make our choices for us. Not a really great way to live. Here's somebody who says, I love my sister, I want her in my life, but she's texting me all the time. It feels like clinging, and I don't like it. And you don't have to like it. We've been taught from childhood that if somebody is in great need and they express that to us, then we have to give it. Example, how many times have you seen this? Pretty much you can't go to a playground or anywhere where there's a group of kids playing without seeing this enacted. A child is playing with a toy, and another child, could be a sibling, could be a friend, a neighbor, comes along, grabs the toy, and pulls on it and whines. And whines and whines. It's a noise that's just enough to make your blood aggregate in your veins. And the mother does what? In order to make the noise stop, she says to the child who was playing with the toy in the first place, now, Johnny, we need to be more sharing. Don't you think you should give your sister the toy and share? And everybody thinks this is a good thing. Or she simply orders the kid to share the toy. We think that we're teaching our children sharing, in much in the same way that we think we're teaching our children gratitude when we give them something and we go, now, what do you say? Take a look at the kid's face. They're not learning gratitude. So when we make kids share their toys, how does that go? Does that foster love? Have you ever seen a kid when his mom says, now, just share that toy with your sister? Have you ever seen a child suddenly burst into an angelic smile and go, Mother, I see the light now. I have not been doing this in a loving way before this, have I? Have you ever seen that? No, never. The child resents it, in fact. In fact, it gives love a bad name. All it does is teach guilt and obligation and coercion. The child shares the toy with his sibling because you're bigger. It's not sharing. It's not loving. But now as adults, we still do the same thing. My sister calls me, so I feel obligated to, to answer her texts. Well, no, you really aren't obligated to. You continue. I don't do well with clinging. Well, most people don't. When she texts, she's asking me about me and my life, but because I come from the same family and I know what questions really mean in our family, I know she's mostly contacting me out of her own loneliness and fear. Well, that's what clingers do. And when I ask her about her and how she feels, she always says, oh, everything's fine. Her marriage is very broken, but she doesn't fathom leaving or doing anything about her marriage. So I don't want to deal with this anymore. Well, you don't have to. But you need to make a conscious decision, if you want to be happy, about what you want. It's an algorithm. It's a decision tree. But you have to ask questions in the right order. I've talked about this before, but it's a subject that we could talk about 100 times in a row and it wouldn't be too many. We tend to ask the wrong questions first. You can't start off with, which is the question that's in your mind right now, how do I deal with her clinging? That's the question you're asking, but that's the last question. So what's the first question? The first question is, do you even want her in your life? It's an algorithm tree. Each decision goes left or right and then moves to another decision, much like we do in logic or mathematics or chemistry or physics. It's really fairly logical. Do you want her in your life? Well, you just said, yes, you do. All right, so we've made that decision. We're not going to the left, no. We're saying, yes, you want her in your life. Second question. She wants a superficial, clinging relationship. It's all she knows. So the second question is, with her in your life, are you willing to have a superficial, relationship with her? That's really the question. We don't think to ask the right questions. There's no but here. There's no, I want a deeper. Are you willing to have a superficial relationship with her? Because right now, that's what she's offering you. So it's just yes or no. If the answer is yes, then you stop all criticizing. You simply accept what presently is. Then you have to deal with how to respond to her clinging and her talking about nothing. So if the answer is yes, I'm willing to have a superficial relationship, now the next question is, how do you have it? Because there's lots of ways that you could do it. You don't have to have it on her terms. For example, you could answer every text. That would be the first question. Do you want to answer every one of her superficial texts? Well, clearly you don't. You've already made that plain. Or another way, it's always up to you. If you hate it, it would be dumb to answer every text. So we've gotten to another fork in the algorithm. Answer is no, you don't want to answer every text. Well, the next answer is pretty obvious then. You don't have to. So you can still have a superficial relationship with her, but take another fork, which is return texts when you feel like it, not when she wants you to. You can answer every other text, or every third, or decide you're going to answer 3 texts a day, whatever. Now, what if you don't want a superficial relationship? We'd have to back up a fork in the algorithm tree. If you want something deeper, this is up to you, and possibly help your sister, you could take a risk and tell her that her marriage is horrible. And deep down, she knows that already, and that there's an alternative. Now, I'm not suggesting you take this risk. I'm just saying it's one of the decisions you have to make. There are lots of risks if you take that particular fork. You're going to find out pretty quickly whether she's interested. She's going to get pretty irritated if she's not. And if she's not interested, then you just back up another step in the decision tree and you go right back to a superficial relationship. Or she disowns you and then you don't have any more decisions to make. It's asking questions in the right order and keeping them simple. You said she clings very tightly to her kids. When they grow up and leave in a few years, she will be in trouble. Undoubtedly, but that's not your problem. You don't have to do a thing. But again, a question. Do you want to? Are you willing to take the risk? I've known people who have taken the risk with their family members and suggested a more loving way and made all the difference in the world in their family, transformed the whole extended family. But I've also known families where you dare to bring up something about a sibling and they'll cut your head off. So, but make it a conscious decision instead of just watching her ruin her kids and complaining about it. That's a choice too, but kind of a dumb one since it doesn't work for anybody. You say, anyways, last night she texted me a few times, not saying much. She probably texts me 12 to 15 times a day. That's a fair bit of texting. I didn't respond because I felt annoyed. She texted me again this morning. I finally responded telling her I need a break from technology. You're sneaky. Since I sit on my computer all day long. But I know her feelings are hurt and I feel terrible about that. But I do need a break from texting. Actually, you're not being quite honest. It's not a break from technology and it's not a break from texting. It's a break from her. You say, it doesn't feel like a real connection, and that's what I'm craving more of in my day-to-day life. But be clear that it's not technology. It's a break from her. Because if I texted you 12 to 15 times a day, you'd like it. You wouldn't be annoyed. So it's not the texting. You get to have whatever you want, kid, with no guilt. You want less texting? Then say so. Or simply don't respond. Only tell yourself I'm going to respond 4 times. And then when she says, well, how come you didn't respond? Don't ever respond to those. No, respond to a previous one. Change the subject. People don't like to be told why you're avoiding them. So, but then it's her choice, whether she's hurt or not. But you didn't hurt her. You continue, I wish that she would talk to you. Not likely you're going to get her to do that. But she is the queen of everything is fine, even though it's far from it. You're back to the choices again, to the decision tree. You get to choose whatever makes you happy. And if other people, well, other than intentionally hurting people's feelings, but you're not doing that. But you get to choose. And if she wants to be offended, well, then she gets to choose. That's her tree, her decision tree, not yours. Here's somebody who says, during my run this morning is when I had this flash of not being alone in this great, big, lonely world. I could see what I'd been reading, what I'd been seeing, what I'd been watching on the videotapes, and I said, oh my gosh, I'm not alone. And it was like God spoke to me and said, you never were. And the rest of the day just seemed easy. We're never alone, really, ever. It's all about whether we have acquired the ability to perceive it or not. How many people have called me after being offended for a year and said, I realize now that you love me. Well, I've been loving you during that year. You weren't speaking to me and you were mad at me too. It's about whether we feel it. We don't ever have to feel alone. Sylvie. This is her mom who says, Sylvie got a bag of candy and Bruce wanted to hold it and eat it. I mean, Sylvie's 4 and Bruce is 3. 3-year-old boys have they don't have wiring for delayed gratification. I offer that in defense of boys because we just really don't. Or actually, when we're 33 either, most of us. He wanted to hold it and eat it, and he was jumping and grabbing and whining and begging like 3-year-old boys do. And so Sylvie, his 4-year-old sister, says, and I've seen her talk like this, could you ask for what you want in a calm voice? I love seeing this stuff come out of 4-year-olds' mouths. So then he did. He made his request for what he wanted in a calm voice. And then Sylvie says, okay, I will share some with you after lunch. She's already a mother at 4. And she did. She even served him before she served herself. This is so cool that kids resolve things so much easier without conflict. And pretty obviously here she's mimicking what she's seen her mother do. I know a guy who has studied real love for years, but the pain of his childhood lingers. And it left him feeling worthless as a child and worthless as an adult. So all during his adulthood, this man has learned to entertain people, please them, cling to them. It's just a reflexive habit. You put him in a room full of people, he will start entertaining people and winning friends. And he's good at it. But it doesn't last. So he can start relationships, but they don't continue because he's entertaining them, and eventually everybody figures out they're being bought. So it's led to a long string of failed relationships, multiple marriages. He's constantly looking for somebody to fill that void. And recently somebody said to him, I think in writing, if I remember, because he wrote to me and he said, this person said that when I cling to, he wrote to me and he said, this third person wrote to me and said, when you hug me, it feels creepy, manipulating, and unloving. And he said, what do you think? That's when you have this brief temptation to lie to people. And I said, yeah, sure, I'm sure it would. And here's the reason. It's not because you are creepy or you are bad. It's because you're still empty. It's because you think of yourself. So imagine if I'm thinking of me and I hug you or hold you and I don't tell you that I'm thinking of me, it's going to come out in 100 ways, 100 unspoken, underhanded, sneaky ways. How do you think that's going to feel to you? Creepy. Is it going to feel loving? No. Is it going to feel manipulative? Yeah. Which is why she says to him, it feels creepy, manipulative, and unloving. It would have been more instructive if she'd said, it just feels like you're doing it for yourself. That would have been cleaner, but all she could describe was the symptoms she was feeling. So he thought about it. Instead of being offended, which is what most people do, and you say, yeah, you're pretty creepy, manipulative, and unloving. Most people would not react well to that. A couple of days later, he writes and he says, you know, I've been watching my thoughts all day, just making note of them. And they're almost all clinging. Let me give you some examples. I've been thinking of taking a trip somewhere, and all I could think about was somebody that I wanted to travel with so I wouldn't feel as alone. I was going to take a work trip this week, and all I could think of was who was going to go with me to make my job easier, and so I wouldn't be lonely. A lady wrote to me and wanted to make contact, and all I could think of was what I would get out of it. Praise, attention, sex, whatever, if I responded to her. I wanted to go to a concert with my kids. Why? So I would feel good as a dad. I wanted to organize this thing, that thing. He gave a whole list of things that he'd done just in one day, thoughts that he'd had. And he identified, he said, they all involved getting someone to do what I wanted, which is all about me. And he said, that comes across as creepy, manipulative, and unloving. I mean, whoa. It's not often that I get to read an email or listen to somebody talk and go, that's pretty honest, impressively honest. Most people would have been offended. Most people wouldn't have written back at all. Some would have written back all hateful and defensive and angry. I'm kind of used to those. But to write back and go, not only is what you said right and what this other person said right, but let me give you 10 examples of how I do it. Whoa. It's an illustration of the principle 8. I say 2, 4, 6, and you repeat back 2, 4, 6. That shows no understanding. That's parrots can do that. But when you can say 8, it means you understand what I was saying. You understand the meaning. In this particular case, I said 2, 4, 6, and this person wrote back and said 8, 10, 12, 14, 16. Do you want me to keep going? I'm not praising you here when I say this is incredibly honest and cool. Just telling you that this is the kind of honesty that will make it possible for you to get rid of your clinging, to have it not keep biting you in the butt anymore and ruining your happiness. So, very cool. Keep doing this. Keep making not so much lists. Keep being aware. And I can't emphasize enough the difference between being aware and being afraid or cautious. Well, I'm afraid I'll make that mistake. That's not going to help you. It isn't. I'm going to be cautious. I'm going to watch myself so I don't do that anymore. No, you're trying to prevent a thing. You're doing it out of fear. Just aware. Because think, if you start every day making a list like if you start every day reading the list from the day before and just noting down the times that you do it today, if you did that consistently over 30 days, I would bet you anything that the list would be smaller at the end of 30 days. Just because you're watching it. You know, I used to hit Donna regularly, and I just started making a note of when I hit her, and just having the notes in front of me made me go, this is really embarrassing, so I hit her less. I'm joking, of course, but that's the idea. In fact, any energy you put into fighting a thing you do really tends to feed it. So he keeps going. He said, if I just feel loved by you, I wonder what would happen. The last couple of days, I did think of your love for me, and I noticed I'm not as tired the past couple of days as usual, and my neck is not as stiff. I also made a lot of mistakes over the weekend with my work, but they were all correctable. So I didn't fuss at myself about them. I didn't beat myself up about them. When you feel loved by me, whoever, nothing special about mine, we're too occupied with enjoying that to be frenetically scurrying about for the kind of attention or excitement that you've spent your whole life trying to get. No criticism. You learn to do it. And it has served you to survive in a superficial and temporary way all of your life. But it hasn't made you happy. So you just trust that I love you, trust that God loves you, trust that a handful of other people do. You lose the nagging emptiness that causes you to rush around clinging to people and being, in the words of that lady, creepy. It's probably the hardest thing that we'll ever do. It is to learn to replace what we're used to all of our lives with what's real. To let go of everything that we think served us in the past. See, we think just because we do a thing well, it serves us. People who are particularly entertaining go, how could it be a bad thing? I'm really good at it. Well, so if you're an expert bank robber, that becomes a good thing. To let it all go and do things a new way, that takes extraordinary courage. When people can do that, as you're in the process of doing right now, I shake my head in wonder. Really. It's a miracle. Seeing people genuinely change in their lives is no common event. I know a woman who's addicted to drama. She got nothing as a kid. She's traveled the world looking for entertainment, literally performing on street corners and at carnivals for attention. No kidding. So, external attention, and also created an internal world, when she's not out entertaining, of fantasy. Constantly thinking. Obsessed with food. Eating it, not eating it. What's the exercise? A world of thinking on the inside and entertaining on the outside. And I said, and she sent me an email. And before I even started reading it, I started responding. Before I read the first line. I said, honey, you're learning. You're growing. And I'm probably going to help you in this email, before I read it, more to see how you create drama in your life. Just guessing that her email was going to contain drama. It's a habit. It's not your fault. You were taught to do it, but it also doesn't help you because the old thinking pathways distract you from what will make you happy. So she starts off. Well, today was not as easy flowing as yesterday. I was tired and actually let myself sleep in, and I chose not to do any exercise today. Then I laughed at myself when I was walking to church, and it reminded me of a friend who said she hadn't drunk all that day, well, except for one beer. And I suppose in comparison to what I usually do, the walk wasn't as much, but I was thinking a lot and distractible. You think? She says, I was thinking a lot. Exactly the point. Now listen carefully to this, because it's a fairly important point. You don't just do things. You do them, walking, eating, whatever, and then analyze them, ruminate over them, fret about them, fuss them, about them, second guess them, grab them with your teeth, and shake them like a dog would a rat. So every single action you do is accompanied by fussing and fretting. Man, it's just frenetic. It's crazy making. You continue. During church, I kept spacing out during moments of information, had trouble staying awake. And on the way back, I thought that if I had said it out loud to someone, they might worry about me. And at what point do you worry about certain thoughts? And are you hearing this? It's crazy making. The speed of the thinking. By the way, I'm not reading everything that was written. Just spinning. At what point do you worry about certain thoughts? Almost never. Worrying doesn't help. Either you do something about a problem or you don't. Like I was talking about earlier with the decision tree. Yes or no, left or right, up or down. The worrying, there's no place where, let's see, would worrying help this? The answer to that's always no. Worrying and analyzing, they distract us and make our decisions less and less rational. Example, this is you, back to you speaking. My heart was racing and skipping and then beat one hard, solid beat. It almost knocked the wind out of me. It stopped after that. I assume you mean your heart stopped. I'll have to suspend my clinical experience to believe you. But my instant thought was, good, maybe I'll have a heart attack and this crazy earth journey can be over. I was surprised and quickly said, well, I don't want to stay with that thought, and walked the rest of the way home with my hands on my chest. Is it just drama, habit, or what? All of that. But look at the drama. Heart attack, then I'll die. My heart stopped. Sheesh, kid. That's taking a single moment and putting it on a stage with bright lights and dissecting it. So what would it look like not to do that? In the first place, when you're calm and not thinking all the time, it's far less likely that you'd have a racing heart in the first place, or a skipped beat. The two are related, by the way. The faster your heart beats, the more likely it is to skip one. So let's assume you do have a racing heart. Let's assume you actually experience the feeling of your heart skipping a beat, experiencing an arrhythmia. People can actually feel a skipped heartbeat sometimes, because if the heart stops for a second and restarts, the next beat is much more forceful because there's much more blood in the heart. I'm not going to explain the volumetrics of that. I quit doing that a long time ago. So how would you react if you weren't turning it into drama? And this applies to pretty much everything that happens. Well, that felt weird. I wonder what that was. Well, whatever it was, I'm guessing that stress probably wouldn't make it any better. So I'll just sit here and remember my daddy loves me and God loves me and it's going to be okay. And if I keep having that hard wind stopping beat thing, then I'll see my doctor about it. But in the meantime, I'll just be calm. I talked to a woman this morning who's feeling more and more loved in her life. And she described how she'd had the flu. She'd been sick and had vomiting and diarrhea and just felt terrible. So she got up in the middle of the night, went in to go to the bathroom, and woke up who knows how much later, realizing that she had passed out, probably from dehydration, hit the back of her head, scraped her elbow, skinned her knee. She just passed out, apparently passed out more than once. Oh, you could have just a fit over that. But she's becoming way less fearful. And she just thought, well, better go drink some water and get into bed and probably not stand up really fast, and rehydrate myself when I wake up. Getting excited and worried and screaming and fussing just doesn't make things better. Stop the fussing. And it actually goes on and on for some time, and I'm not going to go on and on about it. No fear. No fear makes everything better. Well, what about if there's a fire? Ask a fireman. When people are afraid, they don't make rational decisions. First thing that they tell you in a fire is what? Calm down. Ask 911 operators what the first thing that they say to people is when they call hyperventilating and screaming unrecognizable words into the phone. What's the first thing they say? Calm down, listen to the sound of my voice, and describe what is happening. Fear's the great killer. Here's somebody who says, I'm not happy about work. I left my old job in a large company to work at a new job in the same company, but for a new boss. I liked the new job description as an assistant to a senior vice president, but then the old assistant who was leaving began training me in the new job. And I discovered that my duties were far different from what I'd been told when I applied for the job. I would end up helping a lot of people, not just the senior VP, and I don't like being torn from all angles by a bunch of people, so I'm wondering if I should quit. Well, you could, or calm down and go through a decision tree when you're not afraid. So, first, did the old assistant who's leaving, the one who's training you, did she like the job? Turns out, I'm telling you what I found out later, yeah, she did like it. Could she do the job without staying there for, unbelievable hours? Yes, she could do the job. She's leaving just because some family members were moving. So we know it can be done. We know the job's not impossible. So working for multiple people isn't like more difficult, but you're afraid of screwing up. But now that you know what it's like to feel loved, you can look at this without fear and figure something out. And we did. So I suggested that she talk to her boss and ask for what his priorities are. So in other words, present him with this scenario. I have 5 people asking me to do 5 jobs at the same time. What is the priority that you would like me to rank these with? In other words, do I do the job you want first? Then you name the person who is second in priority, third in priority, and are the rest of them just kind of in the pool of fourth? Ask him what his preference is. So now there's a clear line of how things are supposed to go, and you don't feel torn. Torn is a version of what we were talking about with the last person who wrote, fussing. And ask the old assistant how she did it. So you learn that it's doable. Now there's nothing to feel torn about. No reason to quit, because there's going to be something that you didn't know about every job that you take. Or you could just get another job, but calmly check it out first. I know a woman who did a lot of emotional work during her intervention and immediately afterward. And she wrote and said, for the last week or so, I've just been feeling exhausted. Well, sure. Your entire world is changing. You're having feelings you've never had. You're releasing feelings that have been tearing you up all of your life. That is a lot of emotional work. And even though in the end it's going to end up being way easier than the way you were living your life, it's an adjustment. It really is like moving from one planet to the other. Even if you move to a much bigger, much nicer, much newer house, the move is still tiring. And even if the new house is less work to maintain, the move is still tiring, and that's what you're doing. You say, I'm very behind on some parts of my job at work, but I just can't seem to do it. I'm worried it may be a problem, but setting my alarm clock earlier and earlier is not helping. And I'm neglecting some financial realities, and I'm beginning to feel kind of helpless. I get it. But right now, you're feeling peaceful and you're growing are the most important things. So do the paperwork and the details as much as you can without exhausting yourself. You'll catch up. There will be more paperwork. You'll get that done. Right now you're experiencing a miracle in your life. This is a once-in-a-lifetime thing. The paperwork will be there tomorrow and the next day, and you probably won't be killed if you get behind a day or two. So the little stuff might suffer temporarily. You say, it feels kind of crazy and not loving of me to get behind in my paperwork. Again, you'll get it done. Relax. Focus on the stuff that really matters. Being happy is the thing. I did a blog on the subject of boundaries, and I'm pretty sure it was January 2nd. And I talked about the fact that boundaries are defensive, and that on the whole, don't do them because it establishes a defensive attitude. As soon as I set up a boundary with you, look what I've done. I've distanced myself from you. I feel more defensive with you. People who carry around guns in holsters in places like, Texas and other places where it's legal, they don't feel safer. They actually feel more wary. You carry something to protect yourself. You think about protecting yourself. So a man wrote after reading the Boundaries blog, and he said, so He actually didn't say so, but that was the attitude that you can feel it coming through the printed page. So, if I come and burn your house down, will you still love me unconditionally? If I burn your next house down too, then will you keep loving me unconditionally? he clearly likes his boundaries. He said, sooner or later, you have to set a boundary to protect yourself. It's not a boundary. It's just a response. It's a choice each time. There's no defensiveness in it. If you burn my house down and I see you coming up to my house the second time with a torch, I might then choose to tackle you in the yard. But I'm going to respond decision by decision instead of... So what if I set up a boundary? So after you burn my house down, I go, I'm going to set up a boundary. Nobody can come into my yard with fire. How am I going to enforce that? Barbed wire, concertina wire, guards with rifles. My best friend in the world many years ago embezzled an enormous amount of money for me. Way more money than I had, way more money than I can afford, and I had to pay it back for years. So what do? Do I then set up a boundary? No, I just still love him. I forgave him and accepted him, but I wouldn't do business with him again. That's just a simple choice. It's not a boundary. Boundary's an attitude. He continues, if someone sexually abuses me or my child, do I keep loving them unconditionally? When do I get to protect myself or my child with a boundary? You would set a boundary, he says to me. I'm always amazed that people know what I would do. But see, I did have that happen. I did have a child sexually abused. I didn't set up a boundary. Nobody can come in my house. Nobody can take care of my children. Nobody. No, we went to the judge and begged for this man to be treated with treatment, therapy, instead of going to prison where the rest of his life would have been destroyed, where there would have been signs on his door till he was dead that he was a sexual offender and couldn't live within 100 miles of a school, so he'd have to live out in the West Texas desert. And years later, he wrote and said, you saved my life. And as far as I know, he's never had trouble since, but then I haven't kept up with him all these years later. Or I could have set a boundary and felt defensive and told my children, be very afraid of strangers. And then I would have raised a family full of children who are afraid. Boundaries just make people afraid. This person continues, love your neighbor as yourself. So I don't abuse myself. Am I supposed to let my neighbor abuse me if he wants to because my love is unconditional? Even this Bible verse doesn't imply that. I don't think it's realistic not to have healthy boundaries. That's pretty obvious. All this talk about unconditional love falls apart when someone attacks you. Actually, not at all. In fact, you don't really know whether you love somebody unconditionally until they do attack you. Until then, it's just conditional. I know that Donna's love for me is amazing, unconditional, because she loves me even when I'm an idiot. That's what proves it, not that she's nice to me when I'm nice to her. He continues, he's just got to keep this going. Let's say you live in Iraq, and I'm going in a wheelchair, and ISIS comes in and says, you have to convert or they will kill you. Are you supposed to love them unconditionally while they kill you? Well, there's no supposed to about it, but yeah, that's exactly when you love people. And people have been doing it from the beginning of time. It is possible. Viktor Frankl wrote a book, Man's Search for Meaning, that riveted me when I was in high school because he lost his entire family in a concentration camp and came out of the process having learned to genuinely love. The books of Corrie ten Boom, pretty sure she was a Dutch lady, if I remember, who hid Jews during World War II and was then put in a concentration camp herself, and came to love the guards who were torturing and killing people, and if I remember, killed her sister. It's been a long time since I've read those books. So there's not any supposed to. It's just, it's always happier. Not half the time, every single time it's happier to be loving. There's just no benefit to defending, attacking, setting up boundaries, revenge. There's just no win. Everybody loses. Here's somebody who says, could you give me a short script to say to, I love it when people say script, to say to one of the people who comes to our office who ogles me and flirts with me. Those of you who have not used this word, almost nobody ever uses this word out loud. To ogle means to look up and down in a highly searching sexual way, and flirts with me. I feel grossed out by it, and right now I'm living with it and hating it. He is not a coworker. Well, then why do you care? He is who he is. He's proven that he is shallow and degrading. That's all he's doing. So he could walk into the room with a little sign. We could make it neon, if you like. I am shallow and degrading. I demean women. But what does that have to do with you? So why let it bother you? You might as well, I'm not exaggerating, to him, be a beer bottle. You're an object. So why do you care about it? 2, if you simply can't stand it. Well, before I get to number 2, I knew a man once who was just furious at his wife that men looked at her as they walked by her. And I said, well, so what should she do? She should probably set up boundaries. Is she supposed to shoot them? I said, men do this everywhere. I used to walk in airports and just love to follow a guy who was looking at women. And I'm just watching the guy's head. And there are guys who can almost turn 360 degrees as they watch a woman walk by. Just keeps right on going. It has nothing to do with you. It only says something about them. So leave them alone. I mean, what if somebody walked through the airport and just said, as they were walking, I'm a really stupid, shallow person. I'm a really stupid, shallow person. Would that offend you? Well, that's all these guys are saying when they look at your wife. Or in the case of this woman who's writing, that's all this guy's saying about himself. But let's say you really can't stand it. You just can't stand it that this guy looks at you. You could say, if you just can't control yourself, you could stop him and say, I need to say something to you. So he's listening. You look at me and you talk to me in a sexual way a lot. Do you realize how objectifying and degrading that is? Now, you can keep doing it if you wish. I can't stop you. But when you do, I will not respond to you. So if you're looking at my boobs while you're talking to me, I simply won't respond to you or interact with you in any way. I'll simply wait for you to stop it, and then we can continue our interaction. Entirely up to you. You could do that if you just can't stand it, but I can tell you that the likelihood that he's going to go, oh my gosh, I had no idea that I objectify women. Thank you for showing me the error of my ways. The odds of that are 0. So you're not going to accomplish anything. And you can make a great big point of it, but you're going to feel actually less comfortable by stopping the conversation every time he objectifies you. You're going to make him uncomfortable. You're going to make everybody else in the office uncomfortable, and you're going to have accomplished no good thing. So you can if you want to, but on the whole, when people make dumb choices, it works better to do what we've been talking about this entire chat. Find love for yourself. Quit worrying about everybody else. Trust the love that you are given. Remember the love that you're given. And wherever possible, share the love that you have. You do that, you are guaranteed to be happier. And you create the opportunity to make a really profound difference in the lives of everybody around you. Good luck with that. We'll see you in a week.